Hello again, and welcome to Patterns with Gary. Today we're going to be talking about how you could take some of those linear figures that were presented in the last podcast and use them to play solos in the triplet rate. We're going to do this in terms of jazz time soloing because when you play in a jazz situation, the kind of soloing that you normally get is what's called trading, where you're trading solos with someone else in the band. So they play 4 measures and you play 4, or they play 8 and you play 8, or they play a chorus and you play a chorus. And it's a lot different than soloing in other styles. So one of the things, obviously, is you have to learn how to develop, ideas for longer periods of time. But we're going to begin with the simple linear figures in their shortest versions. Okay, so if you're playing in the triplet rate, you have 2 linear figures that would match. The 3 linear, right, left foot, and the 6 linear, right, left, foot. So I could play either of those figures individually, or I could put them together, basically in 3 different ways if we're talking about a measure of time. So I could play 3-6-3, or 3-3-6, or 6-3-3. So that gives me a total of 5 basic figures. The 3, the 6, 3-3-6, 6-3-3, 6-3, I forgot, what was the other one that I didn't play yet? 3-3-6, 3-6-3, 6-3-3. Okay, you know what I mean. So you have these versions to work with. And what you're going to do is work on using them for short fills and solos. And the shortest form that you normally run into in jazz time is 4s. So that's going to be our framework. You're going to play 4 measures of time, and you're going to play 4 measures of the solo. And just as an aside, those of you who don't play jazz time or who don't know jazz time, you could also do this with a shuffle feel or a kind of funky, that kind of feel. It would work with those as well. It's just that in those styles, you don't normally get to trade 4-measure solos or 8-measure solos. So it's really something that if you work on it, if you ever do get a chance to play some jazz time, you'll be ready if they ask you to play some solos. Okay, so how do you move these figures around the set? Well, you already know the 3 motions. There's parallel, there's contrary, and there's oblique. And so what you do is you set up a form, and what I usually suggest is a 4-measure form where you play 4 measures of time, and then you play 4 measures of the linear figure. So I'm playing ding, 2, 3, 4, da-doom, 2, 2, 3, 4, here we go, ding, ding, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, That's all you're playing. It's very simple. It's 1 measure long. And then what you try to do is start moving that around the drum set. Now you want to do it with each of the motions individually at first. So do 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of parallel. Motions like that. And then do 4 or 5 that are contrary. And then do some that are oblique. What you're doing is the same thing that a horn player or a piano player or a guitar player does when they're learning how to play solos, is they take the notes that are in the scale that the chord is based upon, that they're playing, and they learn how to manipulate those notes. I mean, how boring would it be if every time they played a scale, the notes of a scale in a chord, they went da 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 da. Nobody does that. They learn how to move those notes around. They use syncopation. They use different rhythms. They use different phrasings because they can play the notes in lots of different ways. Legato, D, staccato, da, 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 and lots of combinations of that. We're not quite so good at that because the things that we used to play with don't have as much flexibility as they have, but we have our own things that we can do. But anyways, your goal is to work out individual versions for each of these basic figures, the 3 and the 6, and then those 3 combinations, 3-3-6, 3-6-3, 6-3-3, and then start mixing all of that stuff together in your solo. So when you play a 4-measure solo, it might be partly a parallel move and partly an oblique move. Or the moves may get mixed together from beat to beat. There's all kinds of things that you can do. You know, a lot of this gets back to something I told you about long ago, maybe in the first podcast, is the only time you can ever be thorough with something is at the very beginning, when you're working on the basic units that make up the thing that you're working on. Because the bigger and bigger the pieces that you start working on, the possibilities just become impossible to cover in any kind of way. Because by then, you're really improvising. And as we said before, improvising is making something up. So you do a lot of different moves so that you can create something new. Will it be exactly the same as the moves that you've done in the past? I'd say when you're a younger player, yeah, a lot of it probably will be like that. But I think as you develop as a player, what happens is this all kind of gloms together and just becomes one big ball of ideas that you have. But even at this time, we're not anywhere near that yet because we're only working on one topic, which is linear. We're only working on one rhythm, which is triplets. And we're only working on one format, one style, one length of phrase, one length of your solos. So all of those things are happening. Okay, now, in the triplet rate, for 1 measure of triplets, are there any other linear phrases we could use? And yeah, there's 2 of them. 5 and 7, which would be, or 7 and 5. Now, when you play those figures in the triplet rate, do you think anybody is going to hear a 5 or a 7? No. I mean, no one is going to hear that. They're just going to hear syncopated triplets. That's what we want them to hear. If we really want them to hear a 5 or a 7 or some non-matching rhythm, there will be other ways that we will have of doing that. But for today, that's not really what we're talking about. So with the 5 and the 7, you could play it as 5 and 7, or you could play it 7 as 5. You do the same moves around the drums. Parallel, contrary, and oblique, 4 measures of time, 4 measure solo. So you're playing jazz time, 3-4, 3-2, 3-4, 4-2, 3-4. That was my best imitation of a parallel move. But you understand what I mean. Okay, so we've looked at the 3s and the 6s, and we've looked at the 5 and the 7. Are there any other phrases? Yeah, 4s and 8s. You could play 3 4s. You could play an 8 and a 4. Or 4 and 8. And those would be all of your 1 measure triplet bass phrases, 3s and 6s, 5s and 7s, 4s and 8s. So as you work on these things, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes a day, make it a point to do different tempos. Don't always play at the same speed because you got to see where things are going to lay when you do them at different speeds. Secondly, remember the modifiers. We did the modifying the single strokes and playing it as a double stroke when we were doing the linear for a time feel. Well, you can do the same thing here. And you're just moving it around the drums. Remember to involve the cymbals. Don't play everything on the drums. And then, over a period of days or weeks, you'll begin to kind of get some ideas about how you're going to use this stuff. And because we're working on soloing, the further you go into the routine, the more you have to loosen it up. In other words, you have to let other stuff come in. What other stuff? Who knows? Other things that you know, other things that you dream up at the moment, but other things will come into play. So, although this routine is starting out as specifically you're going to work on these linear figures in this way, that's just so you take a good look at what you've got to work with. And then as you start using it, you can do whatever you want. So, for example, there might start to be some space in there. You might go blah-doo, blah-doo, blah-dlah-blah-dlah-blah-dlah-blah. You do syncopated things and you mix those into the triplets. You mix 16th notes into the triplets. You can do lots of things. And the more time you have, the more things you can do and the more that you can expand upon them. But there is no list for this because it all depends on what you know and what you hear. So when you play the solos, you're in the middle of working some motion with some figure on the drums, and it gives you an idea to do something else. Just go ahead and do that. Sometimes you may not even know where it's going to lead, but most of the time it will turn out to be something good. So you have to whenever you're working on any kind of soloing routine, you have to let your musical imagination become a part of the thing. So you're going to be your own teacher here, which is the way it should be when you're working on improvisation. And hope you have some fun with this stuff. And I'll see you the next time on Patterns with Gary.